three men were convicted on all counts.
Of the 12 men and women on the jury, none were minorities.
The government was prosecuting these people for nothing more than what they were thinking.
These men were entrapped by an FBI informant who was paid $119,000 by the government.
Welcome to your weekly program, Balahdan, a show with an accent for those without one. A film documentary on what it means for a voiceless community like the Somali community here in the Twin Cities. We'll hear about those trial of 3 Somalis that were accused of connection to Al-Shabaab. Just throw ISIS there somewhere, and I think you can. And it was a lengthy trial, and it was when it's almost got the attention, national attention, not just here in the Twin Cities. And I've been in that trial a few times, and it was strike me when I walked into the federal building up in the second floor, and here is a huge dog, a policeman and a dog standing in the front of the door. I'm sure that eliminates a lot of mothers and women, and that they will not deal with dogs. And it was very interesting how this trial was handled. It got the attention of a filmmaker here, Ellie Bernstein. She's a documentary filmmaker. She's done a similar documentary, Waiting for Mercy, another trial in New York. And she's been doing a documentary for the last 15 years. So about that trial of the 3 Somalis, young men, that they combined not more than, I think, 95 years in prison. So you're not going to see them again.
We have a terror recruiting problem in Minnesota.
Abdirahman Daoud, Mohammed Farah, and Gulad Omar are all on trial, accused of trying to leave the country to join ISIS.
These 3 men were the ones who went to trial and were convicted on all counts.
Welcome to Balahdan area. So it's very nice, as you say, before the show, that you are interested in the community, that they have no voice and that they cannot tell their story. And obviously, corporate media are not going to tell the story of Muslim American and Somali Americans. But there is a lot of injustice going on in our justice system in our community. So what was the attraction of those trial of those 3 Somali women?
Oh, I think the attraction, first of all, it was the second largest terrorism trial in the United States, where initially 10 young men were indicted. And they were all indicted with the same charges of material support for terrorism. So all of them were charged with the same elements.
Like sending money? Or?
Well, every time you say you're going to do something, for instance, I'm going to take a bus to go to Cincinnati, to go to somewhere, to take a plane, to go to Syria, that is considered a charge, which could get up to 15 years. Under terrorism guidelines, if you make a plan, particularly if you're a Muslim, if you make a plan that you're going to take a bus or a plane or organize a trip to Syria or somewhere, it's a potential charge of 15 years.
Before you act out on it, like it's still an idea.
Before you act out, you do not have to act out on it.
So how you detect scan your brain or something, or remember? How? I mean, a lot of crazy ideas.
Well, that's the thing, that you can have a crazy idea, but if you're a Muslim and you have a crazy idea, it's different than a non-Muslim having a crazy idea.
Right-wing might have crazy idea, and they act on it, and they're not.
The free call from
Allah. I've never hurt anybody. I've never killed anybody. I've never murdered anybody. I cannot see how that can account to taking away 35 years of someone's life.
If somebody says, whether it's an informant or a friend or neighbor says that you have a crazy idea that may or may not have to do with committing a terrorist act, you can be charged by the Justice Department.
That's very interesting, because I don't know if you've read the book, The Terror Factory for Terrorists, right? He studied about 500 cases like this, terrorist cases, and he found out 95% of those cases are either the people lured into this, entrapments and all of that. So an FBI informant can lure some idiot or some young Muslims to think of those ideas. Like,
yeah, I think there's actually some data that since 9/11 there's been almost 900 or 872 cases of Muslims who have been arrested and accused of terrorism. And out of this 872 cases, 90% of them were accused of what we're calling preemptive prosecution. And preemptive prosecution means if you're a Muslim, if you are thinking about doing something, then we're going to assume you're guilty before you're innocent.
The defense counters that these men were entrapped by an FBI informant who was paid more than $119,000 by the government.
So there's an actual term for it called preemptive prosecution. If you're thinking about something, you are already guilty of it.
well, I mean, another statistic that really makes this stat that you say a horrible thing, that 90% also of all the terrorists committed was from white, racist, ultra-right groups, not coming from the Muslims.
Right, and they won't necessarily be called terrorists either.
Okay. So that got your attention. You live in New York. You've done another trial in New York, Waiting for Mercy, similar.
I did another film about a case in Albany, New York, which has some similar attributes to it. They were two Muslim men, one from Bangladesh who was a naturalized U.S. citizen. The other one was from brought here in a UN refugee program from Damascus, Syria. And the FBI basically created a plot to accuse them of very crazy, that they were trying to blow up the Pakistani embassy at the UN in New York. It was a contrived plot. They did not. Neither of the men had any criminal background. Neither of them had done any crime, and they both went to jail for 15 years.
Oh, what's and those guys also went to for how many years? The three men here? You say
A
95?
combination of 95 years.
So, I like the name that he chose for this documentary. You're still working on it, it's not done yet.
Yes.
And that's why you are here, right? You're going to meet the Somali community, and also there is, how do you get the money for this?
Fundraising, friends, etc.
Good luck. Okay, so you no history of violence. How did that name come about?
People would ask me of something, why are you doing this film, or tell me something about the film. And the first thing I would say to them was, what stood out for me, particularly with these three young men that got the long sentences, is they had no criminal records and they had no history of violence.
Wow. So, have you been to any of these trials?
I came to Minneapolis at the end of the trial, so
Okay.
I was not at the trial, but I've been able to see all the news reports, all the court documents, and interview the lawyers and the families. So.
You've been in the last when the verdict was rendered. It was like a showcase for our Attorney General, whatever at the time, is no longer with us, and he was like a victory, and we're gonna. It seems like he's been vindictive about this, that he's gonna punish all this Somali community, and this is to show them. It's like we'll show you. This is what's gonna happen if any of you.
Well, the language that was used
Yeah.
by Andrew Luger
Yeah.
and by Judge Davis really left no opening for whether there was a humanity to these young men. The language was very black and white. They're evil, they're in cells, they are criminals, very, very black and white language.
The case was not about entrapment or about how an informant or the government somehow enticed good or decent young men to become terrorists.
I feel scared. What if I think about something and they punish me for that?
The government was prosecuting these people for nothing more than what they were thinking.
Hello, this is...
I've been in this trial a few times, and one of the lawyer, as I was talking about the show, was asking one of the informant that he lured those people, and about how many times they've been at the mosque, what kind of verses of Quran they were reciting, jihads recite. I've never heard that. There's such something called jihad verses. You know, that means if you recite verses, you don't even know what the verse is all about because it's a bunch of them. And it so happened to talk about jihad, and there's so many names and meaning for jihad. You have that intent that you call jihad. So it was a bogus, for me, a bogus trial. I don't want to be too outlandish here, but from the questioning that the prosecutor and the lawyer were asking, this is a preemptive attempt to incriminate those three.
Yeah,
so they've been incriminated even before the trial was.
Yeah, they were incriminated before the trial. Also, the word jihad is a pop word that is supposed to make you think that an attack is going to happen. It's a violent. To us, Americans or whatever, non-Muslims, we are supposed to think that jihad is violent, a violent attack, a war. From what I understand from my first documentary, jihad really means an internal struggle. So that the meaning of it gets very perverted, as I see.
The biggest jihad, as we understand, the biggest jihad is the internal struggle. The jihad that you have to go out, well, jihad means struggle, but jihad to go war, self-defense, that's even the smaller jihad. But anyway, as a woman, you've done this before, and also as a Jewish film documentary, been interested in social justice. How did that play it out? Opening the door for you in the Somali community?
Well, I think initially there was a distrust. I met the families, the mothers of the three young men, and I think that they've been very outspoken about what happened to their sons. So I think that we forged a relationship, particularly with the mothers, that they wanted their stories to be told about the injustice, and they did trust me. They do trust me, which I'm very grateful for.
Yeah, it's not easy, man. I can imagine because the way corporate media is treating them and how they've been portrayed,
and they haven't been. The media has not been friendly to them. Have distorted their stories and maintains this constant, dialogue that there's nothing redeemable about a teenager who gets attracted to a fantasy or...
Exactly. Yeah. And I think you're right, and I think I had, not Logar, the one before him, maybe a couple of them, when 9/11, right, I think right after 9/11, we had the district, federal FBI, whatever, I don't know, but the district one, the one in 5 states here, and he was talking about the very same issue about this terrorist and Somali Shabab, and I told him, unless we look at this as a gang issues, it's part of the gangs. The gangsters, young people are inspired or intrigued by, instead of going to Chicago to join bigger gangs, they go to Somalia for a bigger gang. Unless you address the problem with youth, and you're not gonna go anywhere. If you think this because they're doing this because they are Muslims, they're born here, they are part of our youth problem. Not so. What's the mechanism of doing this documentary? Because you need also to verify some of the things. I mean, every woman think their son is innocent. So what's the mechanism? You talk to different people, understand that?
Yeah, basically I've interviewed 2 of the defense lawyers, and I am relying heavily on the actual court documents, although I wasn't at the trial. you can easily access the trial documents, the testimony. And
online,
that's black and white. You can't argue with the black and white testimony.
Even the government documents.
The government documents, the cross-examination of the defense attorneys to various people, including the informant, the government's case against the men, how they basically frame. This is all part of the actual testimony, which is irrefutable. You can't really say that you can't really say that you're making it up. You know?
Yeah, it's your own document.
That's right.
So it was a political trial?
Yeah, absolutely a political, absolutely a political trial. And by your own admission, they were, you know, Andrew Lugar and, you know, the Justice Department were basically hell-bent on a guilty verdict. I mean, there was absolutely no way around not getting a guilty verdict.
So what's the implication? How this trial affects the relationship between the community and law enforcement? Because also at the same time of this trial and later on, our legal system, justice system, wants to bring the community together with the CVE program and make this community cooperate with them and be their surrogates in the community. But how do you ask community to cooperate with you when you have such trial?
Well, first of all, I don't think you can. I don't think that, I think from what I understand, I was just told that the after effect of that trial in the Somali community has not been positive. I think that the Justice Department and the FBI can say, well, this punishing these young men will send a lesson that therefore they're not going to do it because of the severe punishment that they deserved. And from what I understand, that's incorrect. That you know, the suspicion in the community is broader, that it could increase tension among people who are non-Muslims. Evidently Muslims are being bullied as a result of this trial. They're being more singled out, so that the aftermath of the trial has not made it a better or an easier community.
It's interesting that since 9/11, we've been focusing on those young men, Muslims, they went on to fight in Syria or to fight with Shabab or fight, and those are the people who really were going after. And I don't know how sensitive the topic is as a Jewish person that interested in this, but also there is, and I raised this question with the authority, and they haven't had respond. Even I went to the Free Information Act, whatever, I couldn't get anything. There is 8,000 Americans that went to Israel and also fight with the Israelis, not just the Israelis army, which is legit according to our law, but also to other terrorist groups by our State Department. And not a single one of those are being put on trial or even research. Who are those people who are going? But once, as you say, once you are a Muslim, even the idea is
incriminating. Are you talking about American citizens who volunteer to be
part
of the Israeli military?
Yeah, the Israeli military, but also there are volunteers and some of the legal, according to State Department, are terrorist groups that are participating with those groups, and but this
within Israel.
Within Israel. But, you know, it tells you that our law enforcement's not interested in actually to solve and to handle the real cause of terrorism and terrorists. They are not after keeping America safe. They are after their own political standing. These kind of trials raise, you know, kind of tension and get these people headlines, and then also get funding for the FBI. Those trials.
You know, part of this whole discussion that's gone on, you know, pre-Obama, that The most thing we're concerned about is national security. The other is the enemy. The Muslims, after all, caused 9/11. So it's just a mythology, through the media that's never been corrected. That we have to have an enemy, there has to be an other, and they caused 9/11. They probably, that's the reason for the Iraq War, etc.
I know when you do a documentary, it's an exploratory process. So what things that you was struck by, or something you learned, or that you didn't know before? Or there was.
Well, I think not even as a documentary filmmaker. I mean, just working on the first trial I did in Albany, New York, and looking at the testimony and speaking to the lawyers and looking at the exhibits, you have to come out of it and say that how could anybody judge that these two guys were guilty? There's so many issues that a jury would have to say if they weren't, unfortunately so manipulated by the media. They would have to say there is no proof. There is reasonable doubt that these guys could have done anything. So when you look at a trial like this where a jury can't even say that there's reasonable doubt, when there are so many
doubts.
Yeah. There are so many doubts.
Well, when I was on a trial, those 14 or 12 juries, they're not a single Muslim or a single Somali.
Right. It was an all-white jury.
Yes, so what is this of your peers' mantra here? That the jury has to be on your peers.
Well, you have to be shocked after you went to the trial a few days. I did not go to the trial, but reading the testimony,
you're almost there.
You would have to say that it's shocking that they would convict, based on even what went on at the trial,
When you do a documentary, you don't want to be that. You're not a lawyer. You don't want another trial. You're just looking at the human story in it.
No, I'm really looking at the legal issues.
Really?
Yeah, because you can't. I mean, I'm not in favor of somebody coming out and saying, everything's bad or everything. Yeah. Look at how bad they are. Look at how bad everything is. You have to believe me.
Okay.
I really think that you have to show somebody proof.
So let the evidence speak for itself.
Exactly. It's the only way. I mean, if they come out of it and they say, I don't believe it, well, okay.
Yeah.
But you have to show them, to the best of my ability, the actual proof.
Mm-hmm.
That, for instance, in the trial in Albany, the prosecution came out with a piece of equipment that was basically, I think, a piece of equipment that postmen used to stamp things. It was something like that, and they presented it as a piece of a missile. So. So I showed this piece of equipment and showed that it was not a missile. Then you have to, I believe you have to show somebody the proof that, of what is not true. So.
I mean, that's kind of ridiculous, really, to present this as evidence or.
There's a lot of issues like that.
So how far you are into that?
We're pretty far into it. We have a 2-hour rough cut, but I'm here this time because after reading the documents and understanding what went on in that trial, I came back with some questions that were not answered.
And you having a fundraising this coming Sunday, right?
Yes, yeah.
And anybody will get interested to follow up and get more information, we'll flash their link, website.
Okay.
And
the Facebook is No History of Violence. And the fundraiser is at Safari. Come in and talk about the film and your experience.
Well, Ellie, thank you so much for coming and talking about this.
Thank
Good
you
luck
for
with the
asking me.
documentary. This is a great, I know how hard it is to delve into this issue. There is a lot of obstacle, politics, legal, social, and so Ellie Bernstein, a documentary filmmaker, doing a documentary about those young Somali men, 3 men that a few years ago that combined their sentence about 95 years altogether. And she is here visiting us in the Twin Cities, and she's having a fundraising this coming Sunday. We'll stay with that story, we'll follow it, and we'll keep you in touch. So we'll see you, and Assalamu alaikum, and God bless you all.
All on trial, accused of trying to leave the country to join ISIS.
These 3 men were the ones who went to trial and were convicted on all counts.
He's not coming to fair trial to my son. Absolutely.
The defense counters that these men were entrapped by an FBI informant who was paid more than $119,000 by the government.
This case was not about entrapment or about how an informant or the government somehow enticed good or decent young men to become terrorists.
I feel scared. What if I think about something and they punish me for that?
The government was prosecuting these people for nothing more than what they were thinking.
Hello, this is a free call from...
I've never hurt anybody. I've never killed anybody. I've never murdered anybody. I cannot see how that can account to taking away 35 years of someone's life.